I was on a cruise. My family went on a short cruise because my stepmother was named Employee of the Year at her work. And so we celebrated by going on like a very short Ensenada cruise.
Oh, okay. How old were you?
15, 16. And we go on the cruise, and there's like a dance club that we go to every night, and it's just teenagers dancing. But on the last night, this girl came up to me, and she was like, "Oh, my friend really likes you. You should dance with him. My friend is a really big fan of yours. You should dance with him." And I didn't want to dance with him because people weren't really dancing. They were grinding. And I didn't feel comfortable with that. You know, I was like, no, I'm a good girl. You know, that's okay for some girls, but that's not what I do. But I felt like I had to, because if I didn't, they would be like, well, what a stuck-up bitch. You know, she thinks she's so great because she's in movies, but you have to dance with this guy. So I went over, I agreed to dance with him, and I just kind of let my mind float out of my body for a while, and then went back to the people that the people that I had made friends with already, the kids who were actually nice, who were actually friends, and who actually respected me and my autonomy and bodily autonomy and such. So, and I thought about that a lot, because I mentioned it to some friends once, and they were like, whoa.
Yeah, that is kind of like a hostile takeover.
Exactly. Like, it is a disturbing story. But I think that, unfortunately, I think a lot of people, especially women, can relate to that. It's just that for me, it was a different thing. It was like, oh, okay, I feel pressured into doing this because he recognizes me as Matilda. And also, it was very strange.
Who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah, who was this guy? I don't remember his name. I don't remember his name.
And so, yeah, so there's actually good girl in multiple ways here. There's the good girl that you were performing for your peer group, and then there was the good girl that in your mind you were like, I can't have enjoyment in this, conventional enjoyment of this, which it seems that everyone is having, because I am good girl. Like, what do you make of that in your story?
I mean, I think that it was sort of a clash of these different good girls, because there's the good girl that had to be nice to my fans. There was the good girl that wouldn't be grinding with a stranger. There was the good girl that was the version of myself that I was performing to these kids that I had just met a couple days ago, you know, the kids who would quickly become my friends. There was, there's the good girl that has to smile and be polite no matter what. And so I was like, if I do this, are people going to be like, Matilda's a slut? If I don't do this, are people going to be like, Matilda's a bitch who won't even dance with her fans? I also was creeped out by the fact that he was a big fan of mine, so he wanted to dance with me. And I thought the last movie I was in, I was 12.
Right.
So that is exceptionally creepy, even though, you know, he was 15, 16 too.
You just felt like icky.
It was just an icky experience. And I remember, like, there was a Missy Elliott song playing, and in the song she's like, as she's in most of her songs, she's like, you know, demanding pleasure, demanding her time, demanding her own, you know.
She's queer, by the way.
She's oh yeah.
She was queer the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
See the irony of this? The full circle.
Yeah, exactly. but you know, I knew there was a reason why, like, I was always like, she seems really cool. And Queen Latifah too, she seems really cool. What is it about these women? But they, you know, and I remember, like, her songs are about, like, you know, 1 Minute Man and all these things, and Work It, where it's just like, no, give me pleasure. Like, demanding it and asking for what you want. And I remember thinking, that is so alien to what I am feeling right now and to what I feel most of the time. To ask for what you want, I don't feel like I can do that.
Yeah.
So that was something. So I thought about that for a very long time, and I didn't really tell very many people about it, because I was like, this is kind of an icky story.
The more you unpack it, the more significant it seems.
Yeah, and it feels to me like sort of this fractalized moment, you know, of this thing that's just kind of
that like larger, lives in your memory bank. If you were to like,
yeah, it's this like tiny part of like a thing that is the exact same shape in my life over and over and over again, and this repeating pattern. And so that's what I thought of. I was like, oh, this was like a tiny moment that, you know, was like part of a bigger thing. And so that's why I chose to open Good Girls Don't with that story, because it was this clash of, how do I be the good girl? You know, my dad would always say, you have to be nice to your fans. You have to be nice to your fans. It doesn't matter if you're in a bad mood. It doesn't matter if you're sad. It doesn't matter if you're angry. You have to be nice to your fans. You have to be polite.
Why did he justify that for you?
I think that he was afraid. I think that he
I
was
would have
really
been afraid as a parent for you to talk to people, but that's me.
Well, I think that my dad also is kind of a people pleaser. So,
Okay.
I think that for him it was kind of natural. My dad's a more passive guy. My mother and my stepmother are both very like outspoken, dominant women.
Yeah.
And my dad's just kind of like, no, don't bother anybody. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to think about it.
I find it ironic that you were taught to be a good girl virtually by a guy, but no, by society.
No,
but like your dad sort of like,
yeah.
And you know what? It's not a fault to your dad.
No.
Because I feel like when we talk about stage parents, the more I unpack it on this space here, the more I realize how groomed they are from an early stage.
Well, there's also, I didn't have a stage mother, but my mother had a stage mother.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My mother had the kind of mother who would, and when I was with my grandmother would kind of act the same way with me. She would tell me to name drop all the time. She would tell me to ask for things all the time. When I was with her, and this is a big part of the story, I behaved like a brat because she kind of behaved like a brat. And she would talk about, she would always talk about how brilliant her daughter was and how smart her daughter was and how beautiful her daughter was. And my mom really resented that. She resented the pressure that she had from her. And in fact, we were going through, this is another part in there, we were going through, I think, some photo book, from my mother's of back in the 70s. And she turned to this one page and just covered her face, humiliated. And I was like, what was that? And I looked at her prom dress, and her prom dress was cut really, really low, cleavage galore. And, and my mother was pretty busty, so it was kind of it was a lot. Mm-hmm. And she said, your grandmother made me lower the neckline.
Oh, that speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm. So that was what my grandmother would do. And she would do things just the stupidest things. We went to a Renaissance fair, and there was a woman playing the queen walking around. And she was like, you should tell her that we met the actual queen. And I was like, she doesn't care. She's an actress in a Renaissance fair in Toronto. She doesn't care,
Right.
that.
Right.
But that pressure led to my mom, and I think that also led to my mom, in technically becoming a stage mother, but never wanting that and always fighting that. And
But
always
assuming
being
the position.
But assuming the position of a stage mother.
I never thought about stage parenting as something that's acquired generationally.
Oh, yeah. I think it is. I think that there's something to that. I think...
No, there really is when you think about it, because women having desires for themselves, wanting to have their own agency, wanting to have their own jobs, but they weren't able to at certain times in their lives.
Yeah. There's
pressures.
also, I think my mother, if she hadn't had 5 kids and been lower middle class, if my parents had been a little bit more well off, or, I think that she probably would have gone into producing.
I can see that.
She had already wanted to be a producer, and if she had lived, I think we had our own production company.
That's right.
She would have been producing things. She would have been making stuff for kids, and she would have been great at it. I think that there was something about the business aspect, the sort of hustle aspect of it that kind of I feel like Joan on Mad Men, who starts out as a secretary who's just very in charge, and then eventually starts her own production company because she's somebody who is very good at being in charge and very good at charming people, and is smart and knows what a situation needs. And that's kind of what my mother was.
Yeah.
So but I also think sometimes people will kind of write off any mother as a stage mother. And I think that that's kind of a sexist thing, especially if the mother advocates for their child.
Especially because stage dads are notoriously way harsher.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, my dad wasn't. My dad was, very nice and very kind. But I also think sometimes a mother will say, look, I don't want my child to be working these hours. I don't want my child to be working overtime. And they'll be like, wow, what a stage mother.
We talked about that in the coalition meeting a couple weeks ago.
We did.
And it was very, very well stated.
Yeah, because I think that there are some mothers and probably some fathers too who get written off.
They're groomed, and that's where it's the grooming process, where it's I don't want to stand in the way of my child's dream.
Yeah.
I have to acquiesce. I have to stand down.
I've heard a lot of that too from a lot of people, a lot of kids who, especially ones who later struggled with addiction and such, they would say oh, well, my parents were just oh, okay, we don't know how this works. Go ahead, do whatever you want.
I mean, that's crazy, right?
It is, and it's really sad. And then, you get these other people sort of acting in loco parentis for the kid, and it's really hard.
Thanks so much for checking out this clip for the Vulnerable Podcast. For the full episode, go ahead and check out my YouTube channel. That link is in the description. Thanks again.